When you feel invisible, God still sees. A fog hangs low over the earth before dawn. It wraps around trees, rooftops, and sidewalks like a soft veil. You can't always see what lies ahead. The outlines blur, the distance fades, but the ground is still beneath your feet. You are still held even when you can't see it. Grace is like that. Not loud, not always visible, but present, holding you long before you're even aware of it, and long after you've given up trying to hold everything together. This message is for the tired, not the triumphant, not the already healed, but for those waking up in a kind of soul weariness that coffee doesn't fix. For the ones who smiled in public yesterday but cried quietly in their cars. For those whose prayers have grown shorter, not out of faith but out of exhaustion. Maybe your faith hasn't disappeared. It's just tired of begging. And I want you to know, your weariness is not a failure. It is a signal, a sign that you have been carrying more than you were designed to hold alone. We live in a world obsessed with visibility. Algorithms favor what's seen. Success is measured in how many know your name. Even in faith communities, we can fall into the trap of performance, doing for God instead of being with God. And in that quiet, sacred space where no applause echoes, where no spotlight shines, many people begin to wonder, do I even matter to Him anymore? If no one else sees me, does He? This brings us to the first truth. When you feel invisible, God still sees. That's not a poetic idea, it's a biblical promise. In Genesis Shema 16, we meet Hagar, a servant girl mistreated and cast out, wandering alone in the desert. She's pregnant, alone, and broken. And it's there, in her most discarded moment, that God appears to her. She gives Him a name, El Roy, the God who sees me. She says, I have now seen the one who sees me. Genesis 16:13. The same God who saw her sees you. Not the curated version of you, not the one that shows up for Sunday service or smiles through work meetings, but the you who lies awake at night wondering if any of this is going to be okay. The God who sees the moments no one applauds. The grace that holds you when all else fades. I want to share the story of Małgorzata, a 52-year-old woman from Krakow, Poland. She spent decades as a nurse, known for her gentle touch and steady hands. But when her youngest son, Tomasz, was diagnosed with severe autism, she quietly resigned. She became a full-time caregiver, vanishing from her professional world and the friendships that came with it. No more celebrations with coworkers, no more professional acknowledgments, just long, often silent days with her son, whose words were few but whose needs were endless. At times, she felt like she had disappeared from the world, like the walls of her apartment had become a kind of invisibility cloak. People stopped asking about me, she shared in a Catholic women's retreat. Not out of cruelty, just busyness. I suppose I faded from their world. But every morning, before Tomasz woke, she would light a candle before the image of the Sacred Heart and whisper, "You see me, Lord, that's enough." That became her rhythm. No grand victories, just daily grace. She didn't go viral, she didn't rebuild her career, but she lived a kind of holiness that rarely makes headlines, faithfulness in hiddenness. And that's often where grace shines brightest. Not in the accolades, but in the small, unseen acts of devotion. Saint Teresa of Calcutta once said, "God does not ask for success, He asks for faithfulness." The world may overlook a mother washing the same dishes for the 1,000th time, or a student studying in silence with no one to impress, or a retiree who still wakes to pray the rosary alone each morning. But God sees it all. And grace meets us in the hidden places. Dr. Jacques Philippe wrote, "We are not lost to God, even when we feel forgotten by the world." What a healing truth. We often confuse visibility with value, but in the economy of heaven, things are reversed. The first become last. The unseen are honored. The broken are raised. To those of you listening who feel invisible in your own homes, single parents raising children with little support, caregivers tending to spouses or elderly parents with no recognition, immigrants rebuilding from scratch in a foreign land, students battling loneliness in dorms filled with noise but no connection, hear this clearly. You are not unseen. You are not forgotten. You are not overlooked by the one who created you. You are held not because of what you produce, but because of who you are, beloved. Mother Teresa said, "In the silence of the heart, God speaks." That means when your life feels quiet, He is not absent. He is speaking, whispering assurance, not condemnation, offering mercy, not judgment. So pause for a moment and receive this. You do not have to hustle for God's attention. You already have it. Here's a micro habit I invite you to begin starting tomorrow morning. Before your feet hit the floor, say this one sentence out loud: God sees me. No matter how yesterday went, no matter what lies ahead, that sentence can become a doorway into a radically different kind of day, not one led by fear or performance, but one anchored in being held. If you can't bring yourself to pray a long prayer, say that line. If your Bible is gathering dust because you're just too tired, start there. This is not about religion as effort. It's about grace as embrace. I once met a truck driver named Ben from rural Indiana. He said something I'll never forget. I drive 13 hours a day. Nobody claps, nobody cheers, but every morning I picture Jesus sitting in the passenger seat with me and I say, "Let's ride, Lord." And somehow that makes it sacred. That's grace, not flashy, but faithful. God doesn't need you to be spectacular, just honest, just willing, just present. So if you're waking up into another foggy morning of routine, of unnoticed service, of loneliness or numbness, know this: the God who saw Hagar in the desert sees you in your kitchen, in your office cubicle, in your recovery journey, in your parenting battles, in your unemployment, in your anxiety, in your quiet prayers. You may not feel held, but you are. And the longer you live, the more you'll realize that feeling held and being held aren't always the same. Faith is trusting that grace is true, even when emotions lag behind. Let that truth settle in. You don't have to get louder for God to notice you. He's already closer than your next breath, not waiting for you to impress Him, just waiting for you to turn toward Him. That's grace. That's love. That's home.
Grace holds you when life falls apart. Not all storms announce themselves with thunder. Some begin in a whisper, a phone call in the night, a look across the table that says everything without saying a word, a doctor's eyes that won't quite meet yours. Sometimes the moment your life changes forever is unbearably quiet. No sound, no warning, just after. And in that moment, the ground breaks beneath your feet, and you wonder, will I ever be whole again? It's one thing to trust God when life is stable. When the roof holds, the income flows, the relationships feel secure. But what about when it doesn't? What about when everything unravels, and the God who once felt close now feels silent? The truth is, most of us aren't prepared for the moment when our world falls apart. We expect small disappointments, not full collapses. Yet almost every person listening now knows what it feels like to live through a before and after. You were one person before the betrayal, the illness, the accident, the loss, and then you weren't. That's where this part of the message comes in. Because the promise of grace isn't just for the gentle days. Grace does not vanish when things break. In fact, grace often enters through the breaking. We see this all throughout Scripture. Job loses everything, his family, his health, his wealth, yet in the ashes he says, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." Job 13:15. That's not a man clinging to comfort. That's a man who has found something deeper than understanding. He's found trust that outlasts answers. And in the New Testament, when Lazarus dies, Jesus doesn't just wave a hand and fix it. First, he weeps. The Son of God, God himself, weeps with those who suffer before he resurrects. He enters the pain before he redeems it. That is the kind of grace we're talking about today. Not the kind that skips the storm, but the kind that holds you inside it. Let me tell you about a young man named Luca from Bologna, Italy. At 28, he was running a small, family-owned trattoria. His father's dream passed down to him. Business was steady. Life was predictable. Then the pandemic hit. In a matter of months, his restaurant shuttered, savings evaporated, and he was left standing in an empty kitchen that used to feed 200 people a day. He didn't just lose a business, he lost a piece of his identity. Depression crept in. He avoided his friends, skipped mass, and lived off frozen food and cigarettes. One night, in a moment of desperation, Luca wandered the streets of his neighborhood and passed a parish he hadn't entered in years. The lights were on. Adoration was happening. Something in him pulled him inside. He sat in the back. He didn't know what to pray. He just whispered, "I've got nothing left, Lord." That night didn't fix everything, but it started something. He began volunteering once a week at a local soup kitchen run by the same parish. He met people who had lost more than he had, and somehow smiled more too. Grace didn't rebuild his restaurant, but it rebuilt him. A few months later, he returned to confession, 10 years since his last one. "I thought I'd feel shame," he told a friend, "but all I felt was arms wide open. That's grace." Pope Benedict XVI once said, "Suffering is a call to conversion. It reminds us of our frailty and need for God, not as punishment, not as a test, but as an awakening. Not everything that hurts you is from God, but everything that hurts you can lead to Him, if you allow it." Sometimes we think God's grace is absent when our pain is loud. But what if grace shows up exactly where it's least expected? In the silence, in the debris, in the tears. The most mysterious part of grace is that it doesn't always change our circumstances, but it always changes us. Jean de la Bruyère, a French moralist from the 17th century, once wrote, "Out of difficulties grow miracles." He was right. But most miracles aren't flashy. They're quiet shifts of the soul, a heart that softens, a bitterness that dissolves, a hope that flickers back on after months of darkness. Grace is not the absence of chaos. It's the presence of God in the chaos. Take the example of Yasmin, a 45-year-old single mother in London. Her husband left without warning. One day they were discussing a vacation, and the next, he was gone. No note, just silence. For months, she functioned like a robot, waking up, packing school lunches, going to work, coming home, collapsing. One night, she screamed into her pillow, "God, I can't do this anymore." That very weekend, her local church announced a support group for women going through divorce. She joined reluctantly. It wasn't dramatic. But little by little, she found herself sharing, laughing, even praying out loud. "I didn't expect to feel anything," she said. But something was there, quietly mending what I thought was unfixable. That something is grace. Let me say this clearly to you wherever you are. Grace is not a feeling. Grace is a person. And that person, Jesus Christ, is not scared of your pain. He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. Psalm 147:3. He doesn't avoid your brokenness. He enters it. He touches it. He carries it. You may be listening right now feeling like your life is a pile of shattered pieces. Your marriage is broken. Your finances are gone. Your mental health is on edge. Your faith is hanging by a thread. But friend, listen. Grace still holds. The cross is proof. Grace doesn't mean we won't suffer. It means we'll never suffer alone. Original quote. Grace is not dependent on the weight of our cross, but the one who carries it with us. Let that truth undo the lies that suffering means abandonment. Jesus didn't promise a life without pain. He promised he would be with us in it, and that in him even, suffering is not wasted. Every scar can shine. Every pain can preach. Every loss can make room for something deeper. This is not false hope. It is fierce hope. Here's something practical you can do starting today. Begin what I call a grace journal. Each evening before bed, write down one moment in your day, no matter how small, where grace showed up. It could be a stranger's kindness, a moment of laughter with your child, a line in a song that brought you peace, or the simple fact that you made it through the day. Why? Because gratitude is the lens that helps us see grace more clearly. Luca, the young restaurateur, keeps one now. He says it keeps him from drowning in what he's lost and helps him see what's still being given. You don't need a dramatic testimony to be held by grace. You just need to begin noticing. Noticing is how faith grows. Noticing is how hearts heal. To the one listening right now thinking, but I'm still broken, hear this. God can use broken things. In fact, he prefers them. He used a broken family line to bring about the Savior of the world. He used a broken body on a cross to bring about salvation. Why would your story be any different? Sometimes, it's not that God is waiting for you to be whole before he comes near. It's that he's waiting for you to stop pretending you're not broken. You don't need to clean yourself up before approaching him. You just need to come. Jesus said in Matthew 11:28, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." He didn't say, "Come when you've got it all together." He said, "Come as you are." So what if you gave yourself permission to fall apart in the presence of God, trusting that grace will hold what your hands can't? That kind of surrender is not weakness, it's wisdom. Let's close this part with one more story. Camille, a 33-year-old French architect from Lyon, lost her dream job after publicly defending her faith in a company meeting. She stood for what she believed was morally right, and within a week, she was asked to resign. It wrecked her confidence. For months, she applied to jobs and heard nothing back. She stopped going to daily mass, stopped praying. She felt abandoned for doing the right thing. But grace wasn't finished. A former colleague reached out and invited her to join a community group of Catholic professionals navigating similar battles. There, she met others who reminded her that truth sometimes costs, but grace repays in ways the world never can. She eventually launched her own design studio. Small, independent, quiet, but deeply rooted in her convictions and faith. Her words, "I thought I had fallen into a hole, but grace was the net beneath me." Friend, if your life is unraveling, it doesn't mean grace is absent. It might just mean it's working at a level deeper than what you can see. You may not feel rescued, you may not feel healed, you may not even feel hopeful, but even then, you are still held.
Your weakness is a doorway, not a disqualifier. We're taught from an early age to hide our weaknesses, to smile when we're breaking, to push harder when we're falling behind, to perform as if pain doesn't exist, because somewhere along the way, we started believing the lie that weakness disqualifies us. That if we don't have it all together, we have nothing to offer. Not to our family, not to society, and certainly not to God. But the truth of the gospel tells a radically different story. Your weakness is not a disqualifier. It's a doorway through which grace enters, a doorway through which God walks in and whispers, "Now, I can finally do something with this." We often think God wants our strengths, our resumes, our talents, our polished prayers. But if you open the Bible, you'll notice a pattern. God consistently chooses the overlooked, the unqualified, the doubting, the damaged. Moses had a stutter and was terrified of speaking. David was the youngest son, left out in the field. Jeremiah thought he was too young. Paul had a thorn in his flesh that never left. And yet, they weren't disqualified. They were chosen. When St. Paul pleaded for God to take away his suffering, he received this divine reply, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." 2 Corinthians 12:9. That line changes everything. It means we don't need to hide our flaws in order to be used. We need to hand them over. Let me tell you about Janelle, a 22-year-old university student from Dublin, Ireland. She came from a family of engineers and professors. Academic excellence was the norm. But from the beginning, Janelle struggled with anxiety and panic attacks. In her second year of study, the pressure to perform became unbearable. She barely slept, skipped meals, smiled in public, spiraled in private. And one day, she stood in the middle of the university library and thought, "I can't do this anymore. I'm done." She didn't drop out, not that day. Instead, she signed up for a silent retreat led by a campus Catholic group. Not out of deep faith, but out of desperation. She just wanted to breathe. During a guided reflection, the priest said something she'd never forgotten. God doesn't wait for you to be strong before He comes close. He comes close to give you strength. She broke down, not because she felt condemned, but because, for the first time, she felt seen. The God she had imagined as distant and demanding was now real and present, in the quiet of her panic, in the ache of her mind, in the trembling of her heart. She realized her anxiety wasn't a barrier to God. It was a doorway. That retreat didn't cure her, but it began a healing. She started therapy. She took breaks without guilt. She stopped hiding her struggles. She began praying again, raw, unfiltered prayers, not perfect ones. Today, Janelle mentors incoming students. She tells them, "You don't have to be fearless to be faithful." And that's what weakness does. It teaches us honesty. It peels away performance. It makes space for the kind of courage that's not loud or polished, but rooted in grace. David Richo, a therapist and spiritual author, once wrote, "Our wounds are often the openings into the best and most beautiful part of us." It's true. Your weakness might just be the place where God plans to do His deepest work. So many people disqualify themselves from purpose because of their insecurities. I'm not smart enough. I've failed too many times. I'm not holy enough. I'm too broken. But listen, none of those things disqualify you. In fact, they might be the very things that position you for grace. Saint Teresa of Avila once said, "The Lord does not look so much at the magnitude of anything as at the love with which it is done." He's not looking at the size of your faith, but the direction of your heart. Are you willing to offer your 2 loaves and 5 fish, no matter how small they seem? Then God will do the multiplying. Consider this: the church itself was built on weakness. Peter, the rock, denied Christ 3 times. And yet, Jesus didn't revoke his calling. He restored it, not by demanding perfection, but by asking one question: "Do you love me?" Your answer to that question matters more than your ability to impress anyone, including yourself. I want to introduce you to Marco, a 58-year-old man from Valencia, Spain. A former firefighter, proud and independent, Marco found himself bedridden after a workplace accident shattered his lower spine. Overnight, he went from rescuer to dependent. From strong to fragile, at first, he resisted help. Refused physical therapy. Shut down emotionally. He even stopped praying. "What good am I now?" he would mutter to the ceiling. But over time, something unexpected happened. A young deacon named Luis began visiting him weekly, not with sermons, just presence. They'd read scripture together, talk about life. One day, Luis read 2 Corinthians 4:7. "But we have this treasure in jars of clay, to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us." Marco stared at the ceiling, tears in his eyes, and whispered, "So maybe being cracked doesn't mean I'm useless. Maybe it means the light can finally get out." He began physical therapy. He began praying again. Eventually, he started mentoring younger men online, especially those struggling with masculinity, shame, and sudden life changes. His story, once buried in shame, became someone else's survival guide. That's the power of weakness surrendered to God. It becomes ministry. Here's a practical micro-habit. Each morning, name one weakness aloud and invite God into it. Just say, "God, I invite you into my fear of," or "God, help me with my tendency to." Don't fix it. Don't hide it. Just offer it. That honesty becomes a sacred space for grace to land. Original quote: "Brokenness is not the end of the road. It's the place where grace begins its rebuild." Your story doesn't have to be polished to be powerful. In fact, people don't connect to your strength. They connect to your struggle and the God who carried you through it. Think about the saints. Many of them were deeply flawed before they were holy. St. Augustine lived a life of indulgence and rebellion before his conversion. St. Mary of Egypt lived in sin before retreating into the desert. St. Ignatius was vain and proud until a cannonball shattered his leg and his ego. God doesn't erase weakness, He reclaims it. If you've been thinking, "I'm not useful to God because of my past," I want you to imagine something with me. A stained glass window. From a distance, it's nothing but broken fragments. Up close, it seems chaotic, but when the light shines through, it's breathtaking. That's you. You are not disqualified. You are being assembled. Let me close this part with Naomi, a widowed baker. In her 70s from a small town outside Munich. She lost her husband and only daughter in the span of 3 years. Her hands shook from grief. She stopped baking, stopped attending Mass. She said, "I felt like a walking question mark." But one winter morning, a neighbor's child came to her door and asked, "Will you teach me how to make those cinnamon rolls you used to give my mom?" That child didn't see a woman consumed by grief. He saw a teacher, a memory, a light. Naomi agreed, and one cinnamon roll became a ritual. Then 2, then 10. She started hosting baking days for neighborhood kids. Their laughter became her therapy. One day she said, "Maybe I'm not who I was, but I'm still here, and maybe that's enough." Friend, your weakness doesn't make you unworthy. It makes you human. And the moment you surrender it, it becomes the meeting place of heaven and earth. So breathe deep. You don't have to be strong all the time. You don't have to pretend. You don't have to carry it all alone. God does not despise your weakness. He walks through it, works through it, waits for you in it. And when you finally stop running from your weakness, You might just find that's where he's been waiting all along.
Sometimes, survival is wholly enough. Some days, victory looks like getting out of bed, like taking a shower even when you don't see the point, like saying a prayer even when your voice is hoarse from silence. There is a kind of sacredness that doesn't shout or sparkle. It simply breathes, and that breath, though it may feel small, is holy. We tend to glorify transformation. We want before and after stories with perfect resolutions. We want healing to be immediate, visible, total. But more often, God works not in the earthquake, not in the fire, but in the whisper. And sometimes that whisper says, "You're still here," and that is enough. Psalm 34:18 tells us, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." That verse doesn't promise he lifts the brokenhearted out of pain immediately. It says he is close. That alone is grace. God's proximity in our lowest moments is proof that survival itself carries eternal value. So today, we confront the lie that says you're only doing well when you're achieving. We challenge the voice that says survival is not enough, because in God's kingdom, just continuing is often the boldest form of worship. Let me tell you about Hassan, a 41-year-old Syrian refugee now living in Marseille, France. His story is long and full of unspeakable losses. His family separated during the war, his childhood home destroyed, his faith journey risky and complicated. Years after fleeing Syria, he converted to Catholicism quietly. It was not for show. It was not out of pressure. It was born in the silence of survival. He doesn't preach. He doesn't lead any ministry. But every morning before the city wakes, Hassan walks to a small neighborhood chapel and sits in the third pew from the back. He prays without words. Sometimes he cries, sometimes he doesn't, but he always shows up. One parishioner asked him, "What do you pray for?" Hassan simply replied, "Peace. Not victory, not answers, just peace to survive today." And that is holiness, unseen, uncelebrated, but no less real. We are not all in a season of thriving. Some are just surviving, and God meets us exactly there. Not after the breakthrough, not when our smile returns, but in the middle of the ache. Fyodor Dostoevsky wrote, "To live without hope is to cease to live." But hope doesn't always roar. Sometimes hope is a flicker, a stubborn little flame that says, "Not today, darkness, not today." We forget that even Jesus himself had moments of agony. In Gethsemane, he prayed, "Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me." But he didn't run. He stayed. He suffered. And that act of staying, of enduring, was not weakness. It was strength in its most divine form. Original quote, "When all you can do is breathe and stay, heaven still counts that as praise." You do not have to prove your worth to God through productivity. He does not require your performance. He receives your presence. Think of Marta, a 67-year-old widow in Portugal who was once the choir director of her parish. After losing her husband to cancer, she found herself unable to sing. Not because she didn't love God, but because the music now reminded her of loss. For months, she sat silently during Mass. She felt useless, broken, disconnected. One Sunday during the final hymn, her voice cracked into the verse, just one note. She cried. She didn't finish the song, but she had sung. That note, however fragile, was a resurrection. Not everything has to be triumphant to be meaningful. Not every day has to be progress. Sometimes making it through the day is your offering. Sometimes your tears are your prayer. I want to share another story, this one from Sweden. Sophie, a 34-year-old social worker from Uppsala, found herself burned out. She had spent a decade working with refugees, children in crisis, and survivors of violence. The work had purpose, but it came at a cost. Her spirit dimmed, her health declined, her joy dissolved. She took a sabbatical, hoping rest would renew her, but the silence only brought guilt. Shouldn't I be doing more? She asked herself. It was during a hike through a pine forest one morning that the answer came, not in a voice, but in a knowing. As she stood surrounded by quiet trees, she realized, I am still here, and that is enough for today. Since then, she has redefined what faithfulness looks like. Not constant doing, but constant being rooted, being present, being honest with God and herself. So here's a micro habit for you. Each night before bed, whisper this line: this moment is enough. Don't let the world's metrics of achievement steal your peace. Survival isn't stagnation. It is sacred continuation. You may not be building empires, you may not be reaching goals, but you are choosing life. You are choosing to stay, and that matters. Jennifer Fulwiler, a Catholic author, once said, even when everything seems to be falling apart, God is still building something. Yes, even in the rubble, even in the long stretches of silence, even when your prayers feel like they're bouncing off the ceiling, grace doesn't only show up in solutions, it lives in endurance. Let's talk about Thomas, a 51-year-old single father from Chicago. After his wife passed unexpectedly, he had to learn how to raise 2 daughters alone. He wasn't ready. He burned dinners. He missed recitals. He forgot dentist appointments. He wasn't perfect, but he stayed. He showed up. He tucked his girls in every night, praying with them, even when his own faith was shaky. One evening, his youngest whispered, I know you're sad, Dad, but I like that you always stay. That's grace. Not the absence of pain, but the choice to remain, the quiet bravery of survival. So if today you're facing depression that won't lift, fatigue that won't fade, grief that won't heal, or stress that won't end, hear this. Your value does not disappear in the valley. The shepherd is most active in the shadow. Psalm 23 doesn't say we'll be airlifted over the valley of the shadow of death. It says, even though I walk through the valley, you are with me. He walks, we walk, we don't stop. And if all you can do today is walk a few steps in his direction, even if they're heavy, hesitant, tear-stained steps, grace counts that as courage. Original quote, in the quiet ache of ordinary pain, holiness still breathes. You don't have to feel spiritual to be loved by God. You don't have to smile to be seen by Him. His love is not fragile. It doesn't depend on your mood. It doesn't evaporate when you're low. Isaiah 42:3 says, a bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. That means the part of you that still burns, however faintly, is worth preserving. To Him, even your flickering flame is sacred. There's a woman in Croatia named Ivana, 29, who battles chronic illness. She spends most of her days in bed, unable to work or travel. Her world is reduced to 4 walls and a window. She used to lead worship in her parish. Now she can't even hold a guitar. But every day she writes one handwritten letter of encouragement to someone she knows, sometimes a family member, sometimes a stranger. She mails them with a prayer. She says, if I can't go out there, I'll still send grace into the world from here. That is survival. That is sanctity. Friend, you don't need to be impressive to be holy. You don't need to be strong to be worthy. You don't need to feel victorious to be victorious. You just need to keep showing up. Let this be your permission to rest without guilt, to weep without shame, to feel deeply without apology. Your presence on this earth, your breath, your heartbeat, all of it is testimony that you have not been forgotten. You are not behind. You are not broken beyond use. You are here, and that is enough for today. You are held, even when you let go. Not all surrender looks like open hands. Sometimes surrender looks like collapse, like falling to your knees, not in prayerful elegance, but in exhaustion. Like letting go, not out of faith, but because you're too tired to keep holding on. We're told that we need to stay strong, that faith means endurance, that letting go means giving up. But what if that's not true? What if, in God's eyes, letting go isn't failure, but trust? What if the hands you unclench don't fall into the void, but into His? This final message is for those who have lost the strength to try again, for the ones whose hope ran out a long time ago, for the person listening with a quiet ache in their chest, wondering if they've missed their moment with God. You haven't. Timothy 2:13 gives us this assurance: if we are faithless, He remains faithful, for He cannot deny Himself. That's not just a nice thought, that's a promise. One that means, even when you let go of God, He doesn't let go of you. Let me introduce you to Simone, a 64-year-old widower from Quebec, Canada. After losing his wife to cancer, Simone drifted away from everything: his community, his family, his faith. A once devout Catholic, he stopped attending Mass. God let her die, he would mutter to himself. Why would I ever go back to Him? For years he lived in quiet bitterness. He didn't call it that. He called it realism. He filled his days with routine and his nights with silence. But grief, as it often does, built up behind his ribs like water behind a dam. Then one day, a distant cousin passed away. Simone attended the funeral out of respect. He didn't expect to feel anything. But as the choir began to sing Salve Regina, something cracked open. Memories came flooding. His wedding day, his wife's laughter, her hand during Mass, the prayers they once shared. And suddenly, he was weeping. Not a dignified tear, but sobs that made his shoulders shake. He couldn't explain it. He didn't try. But in that moment, he realized something staggering. Grace had never left him. Even when he had turned his back, grace had followed. It had waited. It had sat quietly beside him in his grief, asking nothing, demanding nothing, only offering presence. That's who God is. Corrie ten Boom once wrote, "You cannot fall so deep that God's grace isn't deeper still." Simone didn't climb his way back to God. He collapsed his way into grace. And sometimes that's the only way we come home. C.S. Lewis said it like this: He loved us not because we were lovable, but because He is love. That's why grace doesn't run when we fail. It runs to us. There are people listening right now who have let go. Let go of dreams, let go of loved ones, let go of church, let go of prayer, let go of hope. And I want you to know you are not disqualified. Original quote: even when you let go of God, He never lets go of you. We think faith means always holding tight, but the truth is, it often means letting ourselves be held, especially when we've run out of grip. In Luke 15, the prodigal son rehearses a speech of shame as he walks home, but before he can even speak, the father runs to him, embraces him, clothes him, feeds him. He doesn't say, "Where have you been?" He says, "Welcome home." That is grace. Not logical, not earned, but always available. Let's talk about Lena, a 26-year-old art student from Vienna. Raised Catholic, she had slowly drifted from her faith during university. At first, it was laziness, then doubt, then deep shame. "I told myself God was done with me," she admitted, "so I figured I'd make that true." But one afternoon, during a solo visit to an old cathedral just to sketch its architecture, She found herself sitting longer than planned. The quiet of the space pierced through her noise, the golden light, the echo of footsteps, the smell of incense from a recent mass. She didn't say a word, she didn't pray, she didn't even believe, not fully, but something in her felt seen. That was the beginning. She started lighting candles, no prayers, just presence. Then she began to read the Gospels again, slowly, with cynicism at first, but then curiosity, then hunger, and eventually, tears. Today she's not perfect. She's not sure about all the church teachings, but she believes again, or perhaps more accurately, she lets herself be believed in by God, and that, my friend, is the whole point. It's not about how tightly you hold, it's about who holds you. Jesus didn't tell Peter to stay perfect. He told him to follow. And even when Peter denied him 3 times, Jesus came back, not to scold, but to restore. He still does. So if your prayer life is dry, if you haven't opened your Bible in months, if you've stayed away from church out of shame, let me say this to your soul. Grace is not offended by your absence. It's just waiting to welcome you back. You don't have to earn re-entry into God's love. There's no checklist, no probation period, no spiritual boot camp. You can come home today, right now. And not because of your goodness, but because of His. Here's your final micro habit in this series. Each night, no matter how messy the day has been, whisper one sentence aloud before sleep. Lord, thank you for holding me, even when I forgot you were there. That sentence is not a performance. It's a surrender, a way of resting not in your grip on God, but His grip on you. Think of the toddler learning to walk. They wobble, they fall. But the parent's hands are never far. That's how grace works. Not expecting perfection, but offering presence. You are not holding the world together. You were never meant to. But the one who holds the world also holds you. And yes, even now, even after all the failures, all the distance, all the silence, you are still held. So here we are. We've walked through the silence of being unseen. We've stood in the wreckage of what we thought would never break. We've stared down our own weakness. We've crawled through survival. And we've looked up from rock bottom only to discover we were held the entire time. Maybe grace didn't always look like we expected. Maybe it came in the form of a friend's text, a line from a psalm, a stranger's smile, a memory in a pew. But it was there, and it is still here. You are not behind. You are not forgotten. You are not disqualified. You are held still. Always. God doesn't need your strength to stay. He never did. What He wants is your heart, tired, torn, tangled, unfinished. That's enough. So as you go forward through this day, this season, this life, remember this. Original life motto. You may feel dropped by life, but you are always held by grace. Let that truth sink deep. Let it anchor your morning and steady your nights. You don't have to prove anything today. Just breathe. Just be. And let grace carry what you can't.